My name is Brent and I'm the senior pastor at the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto. I was born in Bath, New Brunswick, a small town of about 800. My mother was Roman Catholic and my father was old-fashioned Pentecostal. And when they decided to get married, both sides of the family disowned them. And eventually a neighbor saw, when I was 3 years old, she saw me as a recruit. And so she asked my parents if she could start taking me to the Baptist church. And so they thought, well, between Catholic and Pentecostal, Baptist is probably a compromise. So I was raised a very strict fundamentalist Baptist in Bath. And felt called to ministry in junior high school, but also knew that I was gay. I didn't have the words to describe it at all, and I can talk more about that when we talk about spiritual journey. So instead of going to Acadia University to become a Baptist minister, I went to Mount Allison University to become a high school teacher. I was the first on either side of my family to go to university. I'm still amazed that, I have 4 academic degrees, 3 honorary degrees, I have the Order of Canada, the Order of New Brunswick, I've done a state funeral, and yet neither of my parents ever went to high school. So I'm very, very, very blessed by the opportunities that I've had and by the sacrifices they made for me. Graduated from Mount Allison with a Bachelor of Science degree, Bachelor of Education degree, taught high school for 3 years in Nova Scotia. Found out about Metropolitan Community Churches and moved here in 1976 to be a part of the church, and then became the pastor of the church in 1977. One of the things about the Baptist church that is a strength is they talk about a personal relationship with God. And so very early on, I remember walking out in nature, and God was my best friend. And I think for many gay and lesbian people, because of our sense of distrust or dis-ease or feeling different, we go inside. And I think one of the reasons why gay and lesbian people are thought of as two-spirited or spiritual leaders or shamans in different traditions is we develop that internal kind of connection to God. And so God became my best friend. And God and I would go on walks. And I would say, look at that daisy. How did you do that? That is amazing. And so I think that was my earliest memory of a kind of a walking with God and being amazed at nature and feeling like God was my best friend. Until later on, the church intervened and started talking about how awful I was because I was homosexual, and how God couldn't love me and all those kinds of things. But the earliest memory would be that of just being amazed at how God did this. Well, that friendship was always there, so there was always that connection. I think I'm going to answer your question maybe a little bit differently, because I think it was maybe my first struggle with God, and yeah, I think I'm going to talk about struggle and then how I got to rely. When the church began to talk about sexuality and homosexuality and how awful it was, but even before that, I had a very vivid memory of when I was quite young. Some guys in my little community were playing basketball, and they were joking about homosexuals. And I remember afterwards, one of them was practicing by himself, and I asked him, "What's a homosexual?" And he told me how to spell it, and he said, "Look it up in the dictionary." So I did. I went home, and then the next day they were playing again, and afterwards he was practicing by himself again. And he said, "So did you look it up?" And I said, "Yes." And I said, "It's something about 2 men loving each other, or 2 women loving each other, or attracted to each other." And I said, "I think that's me." And I remember him picking me up and setting me on a fence post. So I must have been pretty young. Picking me up and setting me on a fence post, and him saying, "That's evil and that's dirty. Don't you ever tell anyone that." And so I began to learn what other people thought about me. I didn't know anyone else that was gay. I felt like I was the only person in the world like this, but obviously I wasn't. And I remember in our community, there was an elderly man who was extremely effeminate and who was the joke. People used to joke about him and to him. And he would often, in the privacy of his home, close the drapes and the windows and would often dress in women's clothing. But people would peek in the windows and see that, and so they would throw eggs at his house and things. And I struggled because I knew that, and they joked about him being homosexual. He may not have been. He may have been just a transvestite. I don't know. But I knew that wasn't me. And so their description of what a homosexual wasn't me. So I didn't know where I fit. I didn't, And so I kept praying for God to take it away. And God didn't. And I, thought I would be alone for the rest of my life. I thought I would be isolated and alienated from the church for the rest of my life. And so it became a real struggle. And eventually I went, like I said, I went to university and didn't go to Acadia to become a Baptist minister, even though I knew that that's what God wanted me to do or was calling me to do. But I couldn't. I just could not be a Baptist minister and be gay. I just couldn't do that. And so I felt like I was abandoning my best friend. I felt like I was saying no to God in a way that was so deep and profound that I was saying, I was abandoning my friend. And so I had my kind of 7-year wilderness experience when I was at 4 years at university, and then 2 years at, 3 years teaching high school then. And after my first year at university, I didn't go to church at all. I just could not continue to live with many of the things that the Baptist church was teaching. I mean, they were teaching you're not supposed to hang around with Roman Catholics, yet a whole side of my family was Roman Catholic. And so a friend of mine went into Halifax. I remember how this happened. I had bought a copy of the local newspaper, the Halifax Chronicle Herald, and I was looking through the classical ads for some reason, and I saw this little ad for a gay counseling service. This would have been 1974, 75, and I was stunned to see it. And I cut it out, and I put it in my wallet, and this shows you the level of paranoia in those days, not paranoia, fear in those days, because I put it in my wallet, and I didn't call them long distance because I was afraid someone would trace the call and find out that I was gay. And then I took a pair of scissors and I shredded the page in the tiniest pieces I could and put it in the garbage because I was afraid that if I just threw the newspaper out, someone would see that there was an ad cut out. And that's the level of fear. And then eventually I went into Halifax. I made a phone call. I called. A wonderful, wonderful woman answered and was so gentle and kind with my questions. I connected with the gay community there, a friend who went to university who I didn't know was gay. He showed me around, and we went to an adult bookstore, and there was one shelf of gay stuff around the corner, kind of hidden. And one of them was a magazine called The Advocate, which is the national gay magazine in the United States. And I remember buying one copy of everything, and going out into my little 1972 Ford Pinto car, sitting and looking at the books. And I remember flipping through the pages of The Advocate, looking at the pictures. And then all of a sudden I saw this ad with a cross. And it was an ad for Metropolitan Community Churches. And I cried and cried and cried because I knew it was home. I knew that's where I could be. I knew I could find community again. I knew I could probably answer my call to ministry again. And so that's probably the moment that I started to rely on God in a really significant way again. Because here was like, okay, God saying, come on back. I'm still calling you, come on back. And so I went through a process of deciding, what do I do? I just can't move to Toronto and all of a sudden say, hey world, I'm gay, and I have a mom and a dad and 3 sisters and a brother in New Brunswick who don't know I'm gay. And I don't want them to find out by seeing me in the front pages of the newspaper at a demonstration or something. So I had to make a decision. It was time to come out. And I started telling close friends. Eventually wrote a letter to my mom and dad, tore it up, wrote again, tore it up, wrote again, tore it up. And I remember the day that I finally had it done and came home from school that night and drove into the town that I was staying in, Kingston. Got out of the car, walked in front of the post office, went into the post office, walked across in front of all of the tellers, opened the little bin, dropped the letter in, and was like, oh my God, I've just told my parents I'm gay. And finally, I've told my parents I'm gay. So it was this sense of excitement and terror at what I had just done. And so on Monday morning, my dad called and said that the letter arrived, and it was the worst phone call of my life because my dad was just awful. The old Pentecostal stuff came through. But what was really unique is here I was by myself in my home, getting ready to go to school, and it felt like someone was holding my hand physically during that whole phone call. It felt like there was a strength there, like really physically holding my hand. There was nobody else in the house. That got me through the conversation with my father. Like I said, I'm going to Toronto to be a part of a church. And he said, don't you say church, the word church. It shouldn't come out of your mouth. You're so evil. And it was just awful stuff. And so I think there was a whole period there when I was relying on God in terms of the strength to come up with my family, to hand in my resignation at the school, to leave something that I loved teaching, to journey off to this big city. I'd never, other than living in Halifax for summer school one summer, I'd never lived in a big city. And I didn't know anyone really in Toronto. And so I packed everything up into my car and off I went. And so I think that whole process was my first time of really coming back and really relying on God for a significant shift in my life.
So let's just continue with that. Tell me about coming to Toronto. I'd love to just hear about the journey.
Yeah. Well, I left Kingston with, like I said, everything packed into my car, and I cried and cried and cried for probably the first hour and a half in the drive, because I was leaving behind good friends and moving into something that I knew was significant and a change. When I first told my parents that I was gay, they told me I couldn't bring any friends home again because they thought all my friends that I brought home were gay. I wish, but not all of them were. And so they cut off communication. My mom, when I was in university, would send a letter every week with a $10 bill in it. And even when I started teaching, I would get the letter every week with a $10 bill in it. And those stopped. And those were my main communications about my three sisters and my brother, who were much younger. My mom would call me every week with all the list of all the marriages and births and deaths in the community and keeping me up to date. Those all stopped. And then eventually, before I left Nova Scotia, my dad called and said, we miss you, we want you to come home, and you can bring whoever you want home. And that's really, when you think about in the early to mid 70s and small town, they never met anybody that they knew that was gay. There was nothing on TV about this big gay rights movement, hardly at all. And so it was pretty amazing for that, another case where love won out. Mm-hmm. And so I drove to Toronto. My car broke down in Montreal. So I had to stay overnight in Montreal at a little hotel when my car got fixed. And I arrived here on August the 2nd, 1976. And I had visited the church one weekend before that in the spring of that year. And it was really interesting because I met with the pastor of the church at the time, the Reverend Wolf. And I remember him saying, Brent, you need to find your community. You need to move to Toronto and find your community. And so I did. So I was excited about coming to Toronto and finding my community and finding my church and finding my calling again, and just, so much that was exciting about that and terrifying for a small town kid moving to Toronto. So I arrived here on August the 2nd, and eventually got a job with an insurance company. Two women in the church let me stay with them. And for the first few months, I didn't have a job, and I still had a mortgage on my mobile home that I bought in Nova Scotia. And things financially were really, really tight those first few months. I remember that first Christmas, I bought presents for my family, but I didn't have enough money to send them. And I was too proud to ask anybody for money. And so eventually I called my sister, who was 1 year younger than me, and then there's a big gap for my other two sisters and my brother. And I remember calling my sister Nancy and saying, Nancy, I got presents for everybody, but they're going to have to take a while because I don't have the money to send them. And she said, don't worry about it. And then about 5 minutes later, she called me back and she said, I'm sending you the postage in the form of an airplane ticket to bring the presents home. And so I was able to go home that Christmas and take the presents to visit my family. So the first few months were rough in terms of adjustment. This big city. I mean, even things like, silly things. Like I remember one day walking around just looking at the tall buildings and like, wow. And then I kept seeing all these people standing on the street in groups, and I thought, what is going on? And I asked them, and they said they're bus stops. And I, just things like that I wasn't even used to. And so, but again, making friends at the church, knowing it was home, knowing it was where I belonged. The Christian community, any faith community, at its best, provides both comfort through difficult times and challenging you to be better, to think differently, and to be more generous, and to be more forgiving. And I missed both of those for those 7 years. And so being back a part of a community again was exciting and wonderful. And so I arrived in Toronto, eventually got my own apartment near here, near the gay area. And so it was really, and it felt like home. The church felt like home. The gay community felt like home, as challenging as it was, because initially the gay community was very anti-religious. And I understand why, because religion had been the main opposition to any kind of self-acceptance, self-esteem, and lots of gay and lesbian people felt kicked out of the church and felt the church was the main opposition to any kind of human rights. But yet, I always felt that the Christian church, like most faith communities, are human institutions, and they make mistakes. The church was the largest institution behind slavery, and apartheid. And the church, and still many churches and faith communities, are extremely sexist, in terms of how they approach the full inclusion of women in the church. And the church still, way too often, instead of preaching their own beliefs, tries to legislate morality. And so they tried not only to say this is what we think we should do or how we should live, but this is how you should live. And so we're going to make laws to tell you how you should live. And so, and so when the church moves into that realm of legislating morality for everyone else, then for lots of people, the church becomes the enemy. The church becomes the oppressor. And so that was clearly the case in the gay lesbian community. And so part of our job was to kind of, I don't want to say re-spiritualize, because I don't want to say the gay community lost spirituality, but I think part of our job was to make spirituality acceptable again. And so in the early years, I would do something where I would wear my collar, and I would also wear a pink triangle, because in those days that was the main symbol. And so people would see gay and Christian, and so many conversations with people, they would see it and they'd start crying. They'd say, "You're a minister, you're gay?" I'd say, "Yes." And they'd say, "I was kicked out of my church," or "I left my church," or whatever, and it began a lot of conversations. So those were the earlier. Yeah, so when I got to Toronto, when I had visited Toronto that first time I had visited before I moved here, I told the pastor of the church that I felt a call to ministry. And, he said, "Come to Toronto and get involved in the church and see." And so I did, and when I got here, I really wanted to get involved, and it was clear that I was called, and that's what I needed to do. And by called, I mean, it's that deep, deep urge that never goes away, that you struggle with, that's there. Sometimes I say to people, if you feel called for ministry, spend some time denying it, spend some time saying you're not going to do it, and if it doesn't go away, then let's talk. Right? And it didn't go away. And I remember when I first expressed it publicly was when I was in junior high school, and we used to have career day. And it was once a week or once a month, I can't remember, when we would take some time, and they had these big binders with a page on being a doctor, and a page on being an engineer. And it would talk about the profession, and then it would have some contact information. And so career day was handing those binders out, and everybody got to pick a page and to read it and write down the information. And so the teacher at the front would say, okay, would go down the row and say, what page do you want, what page do you want, what page do you want? And when she came to me, I said, minister. And that was like verbalizing it. And subsequently I mentioned it in my Baptist church. And because I was raised in the Baptist church without either side of my family being involved, they supported me doing it, but they weren't involved in the Baptist church. I became kind of this, favorite of all the little old ladies in the church, right? And so when I had, they would always say, I bet you're called to being a minister. I think you should be a minister. And so people were very encouraging of me doing that. And when I made the decision not to go to Acadia, the Baptist University, and become a minister, it was, like I said, it was difficult, but it was also challenging because people would say, why not, why not, why not? And I couldn't tell them. I couldn't tell them the truth. That I had this feeling inside of me of being gay, of being different, that they were all saying was wrong. And I just knew I couldn't preach that party line. And I just knew it wasn't going to work. I couldn't, until God took it away, I couldn't answer that call. And God never took it away. I think there was no question in my mind from the day I left Nova Scotia that was what I was going to do. I was leaving Nova Scotia to become part of the church and to answer my call. And so that was just clear. And the time I visited Toronto, I was able to attend a Sunday service. And I remember sitting in the back pew by myself crying and knowing this was home. Just like that when I saw the ad, being in church and being and seeing, a large number of gay and lesbian people worshiping God and expressing their faith. It was clear to me this was home and that this is where I needed to be and to answer my call. And so, the minister said, okay, we'll make you what they call a student clergy. And so I became a student clergy. And because of my interest in social justice and human rights, they made me the church's representative to the gay rights movement. And so very quickly I got involved, almost instantly, because there happened to be a national gay conference in Toronto, just down the road at Jarvis Collegiate. And I went as the church's representative. And in those days, student clergy looked like this, but they wore a collar with a black stripe down the middle that signified that they were a student. But it looked to everyone else like you were a minister. And I remember, one of the leaders of the gay community at the time spitting on me because he said I was selling out to the enemy by being involved in the church. And so it was tough. It was tough getting, the gay community to accept our church. They thought we were just a bunch of gay people playing religion and representing the enemy. But gradually over time, I think the community began to accept the fact that the church was really serious about human rights, that we were an important ally in the human rights journey, and would call upon us more and more. And one of the things I've learned over the years is whenever the religious right are able to frame an argument of God versus gays, so when it's these churchy people debating a gay activist, or we lose. And so part of the job of our church is to be involved in all these human rights efforts to undercut that God versus gays argument. And I think one of the reasons why we've been so successful in Canada in advancing human rights for gay and lesbian people is that our church has played a leadership role. It was kind of funny because when I first arrived, because I was, I had 2 university degrees, I was a high school teacher, and because I was raised a Baptist, they assumed that I knew the Bible because I was raised a Baptist, etc. And Canada in those areas was a mission area in our denomination, which meant it was an area that was, churches were newly being founded and they wanted expansion, and so the rules were looser. The pastor that founded our church left when I was here to go to Vancouver to start a church. They hired a second pastor and it didn't work out. And so the church had a real division. They voted 51% to 49% to remove the pastor. And so I had been around by then. I was seen as a bridge builder, trusted by both sides. And so the board of the church, and I was supposed to be licensed, we called them in those days. I was supposed to be licensed as a clergy person in August and sent back to Nova Scotia to found a church. But my paperwork got fouled up, not by me. And so I had to wait in Toronto for a while. And so the church said to me, and so then when I got my licensed and became clergy in August the 2nd of 1977, the church asked me if I would stay on as the pastor while they looked for a new pastor. So on August the 24th, 77, I became the pastor of the church. And I had no formal theological education. and I had to get it after the fact. So I immediately or quickly enrolled at the Toronto School of Theology to get my Master of Divinity degree. And so I worked full-time as the pastor of the church and full-time getting my Master of Divinity degree, and it was crazy trying to do both of those things at the same time. But it was important, really important. And so the church started to come together, started to work together. The two sides started to come together to build something. And even though I was the interim pastor at first, I applied for the position, which was allowed, and they voted me in as the pastor. So since that first date, on August the 24th, 77, I've been the interim and then the regular pastor. So this August the 24th will be my 40th year serving with this local congregation. And a couple of years ago, I announced that I would be retiring as the senior pastor. There are other things I want to do, other things I'm excited to do that I really can't get to do while I'm the senior pastor. Our church has grown. We've got 3 services on Sunday. We average about 600 people on Sunday. We webcast our services live at mcctoronto.com, and then they're archived during the week. And now we're at 146 countries around the world that watch the service. And so, but it's grown to be a big organization, and a lot of my time is the CEO, is the administrator, is the person with performance reviews and job descriptions and board meetings and fundraising and all of those things. And there's some things I really want to do that I can't get at doing. And so I'm 66 years old, and if I want to do those things, I need to get on with the second half of my life and get them done. So sometimes at the end of this year, this Christmas Eve service tentatively is planned to be my last service as the senior pastor. And it's been an amazing. There've been tough periods, difficult times. But I couldn't wish for anything better for anyone. And I wouldn't do it over again. I wouldn't do anything else. It's been amazing, absolutely amazing and to be born in this time, to see the worst of the worst, to be beaten up by the police, to be chased by gay bashers, to have my life threatened on a number of occasions, to have a bulletproof vest hanging upstairs in my closet that I've had to wear on a number of occasions, and yet to do the first legal marriages of a gay or lesbian couple anywhere in the history of the world, and to be able to work to change human rights legislation in Canada. This little pin is the Order of Canada, which is the highest civilian honor that any Canadian can receive. And I remember getting the phone call from a young woman who said, from the Governor General's office, she said, "Reverend Hawks, I hope you experience this to be a very pleasant phone call." And she said, "The selection committee headed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada has nominated you for the Order of Canada. Would you accept?" And they flew John and I, my partner, my husband, and I to Ottawa to the ceremony. And Michael Jean was the Governor General at the time. And when she pinned the big medal on, she whispered into my ear, "This is for all of those years working for inclusion." And so, I've been really, really blessed. I've got a wall at my office that's full of certificates and citations and honors and plaques and stuff. I've received so many letters and emails from individuals that I've never met, whose lives have been touched by the work that we do at our church. We started what's now the oldest LGBT high school in the world in the basement of our church, where kids who'd given up on school, who'd been bullied out of the education system, have come back and got their certificates, got their high school diploma. We have a dynamic refugee program, and literally hundreds of refugees that we're either sponsoring or supporting in one way or another. And now, equal marriage that started at our church, and there were serious death threats. I had bodyguards protecting me, 12 bodyguards protecting me. There were 50 police officers in the church that day. Everyone was searched. I was assaulted that morning in church. I couldn't leave my home for 2 weeks without a bodyguard because of the threats. And the government refused to recognize the wedding, so we took them to court. And we won the court case, and we won the appeal case along with other gay couples. And that's how we have equal marriage. And when we won the court case, the judges ordered the government to backdate the approval to include our weddings. And so that's why our weddings on January the 14th, 2001 became the first in the world. So it's been a phenomenal journey, and very, very, very blessed. And so I'm glad that God hung in with me and didn't give up on me, even when I was, for a period, giving up on God. I think doubt is a really healthy thing. I say to the congregation, the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is anxiety and worry. And it's like faith is like floating on the ocean, that you can float, but when you struggle and fight against it, when you're anxious, then you can sink. And so I think doubt is very healthy, and I think it's very holy to say that you don't know or that you wonder. And doubt can point us to areas where we need to do more work, where we need to talk to other people and see how they're handling things, etc. And so I've never felt that one of the things that's dangerous about fundamentalism, there are many things, all forms of fundamentalism, what's dangerous about fundamentalism is they seem to really give unrealistic expectations to people about their relationship with God. Like, if you ask, you'll receive, right? I could ask forever to win the 100-yard dash at the Olympics, and I'll never win that gold medal, no matter how faithful and no matter how hard I work. It will not happen, right? And so I think it's very important for us not to set up those unrealistic expectations. And I think a lot of people doubt God, give up on religion because they believed that stuff. They believed that if they prayed for their friend who was dying, that they would be healed, and when they're not, they think there's something wrong with them. Or they blame God, and so people spend way too much time begging God or blaming God. And I think most of the time God works through us, works through people. And I think that God has already given us many, many, many gifts and strengths, and so instead of accepting those, we beg God for them. And it's an easy way to absolve ourselves of responsibility. And a little example is a lot of churches will pray a prayer and they'll say, "Hear our prayer, O God." To me, one day I thought, that's the dumbest thing in the world. Why would you ask God to hear your prayer when God could not hear your prayer, right? I mean, if God is everywhere, always with us, all around us, how could God not hear that prayer? And so in our church, we say the prayer and we say, we thank you for hearing our prayer. And we accept that our prayer is heard, and we accept that our prayer may be answered yes, no, or wait. Right? And so, I think in terms of doubting God,
has there been a significant doubt in your journey that helped you profoundly?
Yeah, I think there have been many times when I have doubted a number of the traditional teachings of the Christian church, or doubted the way, in particular, how the church has handled the Bible. I think that it's been really unfortunate that most of the world's religions are based on ancient scriptures, and that those scriptures are taken way too literally. And I've always, I shouldn't say I've always said, I was raised a Baptist. I haven't always said this. I have come to believe, when I've doubted things in the Bible, like when the Bible says that the people of Israel escaped Egypt, journeyed through the wilderness, arrived at the promised land, and that God said to them, go into the promised land and massacre every man, woman, and child and take possession of the land. I don't believe God ever said that. They got it wrong. Right? And I think that the Bible is best thought of as the record of the early people of faith and how they struggled with the same questions we struggled with, and their story. Why are we here? Is there a God? Is there life after death? How do we deal with evil? How do we deal with bad things when they happen? What does it mean to go deeper spiritually? How do we connect with God? And so all these great, wonderful, deep questions, the early people of faith struggled with them as well. And so the Bible is a great record of their history. And sometimes they got it right, and sometimes they got it wrong. And so if we look at the Bible that way, and if we look at the Bible as metaphor, then it comes alive. And to give you an example, in the New Testament, there's a story about Jesus walking on water. And he came, the disciples were on the boat, and it was windy, and they were afraid, and he came walking on water, and they said it was a ghost. And then Jesus spoke to them, and Peter said, if it really is you, Jesus, ask me to get out of the boat and walk on water. And Jesus said, come on. And so the story is, Peter got out of the boat, started walking on water, got afraid, began to sink, and reached out, and Jesus lifted him up. Now, if you take that story literally, all you're left with is, wasn't Jesus great? Right? But if you take it metaphorically, we're all called to get out of the boat. We're all called to get out of the safe places and to overcome our fears. And when we overcome our fears, sometimes we'll be afraid and we'll sink, start to sink. And if we reach out to help and support, if we connect back to our faith again, we'll overcome those fears. And miraculous things happen. Right? And so I think in terms of my doubting, first of all, I think the biggest one in the early days was I really doubted, I questioned, if God created me in God's image, why then, if the church says homosexuality was so bad, why would God not change me back to being a heterosexual? Why would God not take that away? And so when I was a kid, I prayed and prayed and prayed for God to take away these desires. And they never did. So there was an element of doubt there. What's wrong here? Am I not praying hard enough? Is the church wrong? Is God punishing me? What is going on here? If God, my best friend, wouldn't fix this. And today I can say, thank God that God never answered that prayer. Or I would never have had this incredible journey. I would never have gotten to this place of self-acceptance and seeing sexuality, seeing sexual orientation very different from what the church and society taught it. Because remember, back then, homosexuality was a criminal event, a criminal situation in Canada. And people were thrown in jail for having adult consensual sex. And so I think that the doubt has been more... that would be the big doubt time, would be doubting God in terms of, God, do you really love me if you're doing this, if you're not taking it away? But after I moved through that and saw that it wasn't a question of, in the same way, some people are left-handed, and, it's hard in our society for left-handed people sometimes, and sometimes people might pray to be changed to be right-handed, but I don't know of anybody who ever was, or eye color changed, or height, or different things, different characteristics. And I see now sexual orientation as just being part of God's wonderful diversity in the universe. And so over the years, I think doubt more would take the form of doubting a particular belief or questioning a particular teaching of the church, and then wrestling through that, or looking at the Bible and questioning, why would the Bible say, slave obey your master? Or why would the Gospel of John say that the children of Israel are the children of the devil? Why would those kinds of things be in a holy book? But then when you realize that the Bible is 66 books, it was put together by a conference of bishops and politicians when the emperor said, I want one religion, I'm going to choose Christianity because I like you guys. I want one structure, so therefore figure out your structure. I want one set of books, because you're all fighting over the books. I have one set of books, we'll burn the rest. And so they had this conference and they voted which books got in, which books got out. So the Gospel of John barely got in with the awful statement about Jews. The Gospel of Thomas didn't get in with some wonderful stuff. The Gospel of Mary, written by a woman, didn't get in with some wonderful stuff. And so, when you see that, you can still love the Bible, but you realize that it is a collection of different books by different people with some good stuff and some awful stuff in it. And so then I can say, okay, then it's reasonable for me to say, I don't believe Jesus ever said that, or I don't believe God ever said that, and to treat the Bible realistically. I love the title of a book, Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalists. I think my faith has matured. They say a sign of a mature faith is being able to hold two contradictory truths at the same time. And I think that wrestling with questions, I've become much more comfortable with not knowing. I say that at our church, we practice best guess theology. And so is everybody else, but we admit it. I can't prove to you there's a God, but when I look around at the amazing beauty of nature and the complexity of nature, when I look at the human body, and the ability of the human body to heal itself, and the way that the human body all works together, like the best explanation for all of this to me is that there's something behind it, that this is just not chance. And that's something I call God. But I can't prove it. But it's my best guess. I say to people, I don't know if there's a God, but I believe that there is a God. Right? And that's, to me, faith is about believing when we don't know. And so I would say I've become much more comfortable with not knowing. I don't have to have hard and pat answers like fundamentalism way too often tries to give people. I think also, when I've gone through devastating times in terms of the death of a friend, when HIV/AIDS hit our community, we were burying hundreds of people, and some close friends and close members of the church, we would pray and pray and pray and pray that they would get better. And sometimes people would, and sometimes people wouldn't. But I still trusted God. I don't understand why, sometimes prayers seem to be answered and other times they don't. But I still trust. That's, to me, the difference between hope and expectation. That we can pray hoping, but we shouldn't pray expecting. Because when we pray expecting that the prayer is going to be answered, and it isn't, then we feel somebody's wrong or something's wrong. But when we pray hoping, and it's like we pray to God and we hope, and then we let it go, and we trust God. So I think that's a big way my faith has changed, is accepting there's so much that we don't know, but that's okay. So there were a number of gay and lesbian couples who wanted to get married over the years and who went to City Hall to get a marriage license. And because one of the main ways today that people get married is they go to a City Hall, they get a marriage license, and then they go to a minister, priest, or rabbi, or justice of the peace, some official, and ask them if they would marry them. And if they say yes, they can say no. But if they say yes, then there's that combination of the certificate with the ceremony, which is the signing of the certificate and everything, that constitutes the marriage. So it's the certificate plus the ceremony. And most couples go to City Hall to get a certificate. In Toronto, the City Hall said, as most of them do, we can't give you a certificate to all gay and lesbian couples because it's not legal. Now, the difference in Toronto, they said, we wish we could, but we can't. And so those 8 couples in Toronto took the City of Toronto, the provincial government, and the federal government to court, because all 3 levels have a different piece of the marriage thing. And so they took them to court and were suing for the right to get a certificate. So because we were so involved in human rights issues, our lawyer, Douglas Elliott, we asked Douglas to intervene with them on their behalf, because the religious right were so lined up opposing them. We wanted there to be religious support. And during the time that Douglas was meeting with those lawyers, a professor from Queen's University, Kathleen Leahy, she had been doing the research on the Marriage Act. And she found that in Ontario, as in a few provinces in Canada, there still was another way to marry. A more churchy way, ironically, to marry, called the publication of the banns, B-A-N-N-S. Some provinces had done away with it, but Ontario still had it. And that's where a couple, usually heterosexual, at that point always heterosexual, would go to their pastor and say, we want to get married. And the pastor would say, if the pastor said yes, then the pastor would go in front of the congregation on 3 Sundays and read the banns. And he would say, I want to let you know that John so-and-so and Mary so-and-so want to get married. Does anyone here know of any lawful reason why they may not? And the assumption is that the couple were known in the congregation, and that if anyone knew of any lawful reason, they would object, especially if it was announced 3 Sundays. And in the act, it listed the lawful reasons why people could not get married. They were close relatives, brother and sister or cousins. They were underage. They were already married to somebody else. One of them was not mentally competent to make the decision. And what Professor Leahy discovered in that section of the Act, it said any 2 persons. It never said male and female. And so she said to Douglas, our lawyer, she said, I think Brent because I already had a license to marry heterosexual couples. She said, I think Brent can already marry gay couples under the section of the banns. So Douglas came to me and said, would you? And I said, let me check with the board. And the board said, absolutely, this is a justice issue. And it's not pro or anti-marriage. The issue is marriage is an important institution, and heterosexuals should be free to choose or not choose, and gay people should be free to choose and not choose. So it's freedom of choice for me, the issue, freedom of access to the institution. So the board absolutely said yes, we would do it. And so on Human Rights Day in 2000, in December 10th, we announced that we would start marrying the first gay and lesbian couples in 2001. We'd heard that the Netherlands had approved it for March, so we wanted to pick a date before theirs. So not that we're competitive. And so we chose January the 14th. And so for 3 Sundays, we read the banns in our church. For 2 couples, we chose a lesbian couple and a gay male couple, because we wanted that imagery of male and female. And we chose 2 couples who had already had what we in those days called a holy union, a blessing of their relationship, a celebration of their relationship. So they already had their private moment, and they were stable couples. So it was Anne and Elaine Votor, and Kevin and Joe, Kevin Brass and Joe Varnell. And so we approached them to say, we're going to be marrying 2 couples. Would you do it? And they both thought about it and said yes. And so we announced on that Sunday that we would be marrying them. The first Sunday, we leaked it to CBC that we were doing this. And so CBC covered it. And obviously there were no objections because there was no publication ahead of time. There was no objections. And there was huge applause. And we were all hugging after I read the banns. And we're hugging and crying and celebrating. But the second Sunday, there were 2 objections. 2 fundamentalists came to the service, and one of them called me ahead of time, Ken Campbell, who was one of Canada's leading fundamentalists. And he said, Brent, I'm coming to your church to object. How's it going to work? And I said, here's how it's going to work, Ken. I will acknowledge you when you stick your hand up, but please be respectful of our church and stuff. And so he stuck his hand up and he said, I object because the Bible condemns it. Marriage is just a man and a woman and stuff. And then another person said the same kind of thing. And I said, it's my job, under the publication of the bans section of the Act, to determine whether your objection is legal or not. And I rule that your objection is not legal. And so we'll proceed with the weddings. I felt very powerful. And I said, we'll proceed with the weddings. There was huge applause again. And the third Sunday, 2 more fundamentalists showed up to object. But at the end of the third Sunday's objections, I said that the objections were not legal to the Act, and so we would proceed. And I said, now, having read the bans for the 3 Sundays, there have been no lawful objections raised. And so on January the 14th, 2001, we will proceed with the weddings. Now, there was a lot of media coverage by then, a lot of media coverage. And one of the reporters told me that before we made the announcement, they had taken a public opinion poll on the support for gay marriage. And then again, they did the same kind of poll after the weddings in January. And they said it was the biggest shift in public opinion on any social issue in the history of Canada, because everybody was talking about gay marriage. Everyone was talking about this little church in Toronto that was going to start to marry gay people. And then, unfortunately, also the death threats started coming in. And the police came to me and said, these death threats are serious. You've got to wear a bulletproof vest. I had it from other times when my life was threatened. And so it was very scary. And there was all kinds of protections that were being put in place. And so I called my parents the night before to tell them that I loved them if anything happened. And that they knew that I loved them. That Sunday morning, we had services in the morning, and the weddings were in the afternoon. And that Sunday morning, some bodyguards came and picked me up, my partner here. And they said, Brent, you've got to wear your vest because we're going to drive you to church in a different route, just in case, because the police said that there were people coming to kill me that day. And so they drove us to church a different route, whisked me into the church. I had to stay in my office until the 9 o'clock service, go out, do the service, go right back into my office, stay there, go out to the 11 o'clock service, come right back into my office and stay there. And frankly, we let our guard down a bit because at the 11 o'clock service, in the middle of the service, a woman came to the front of the service yelling and throwing pamphlets. And so I approached her very calmly and told her that it was a criminal offense in Canada to disrupt a worship service, a religious worship service, and that she needed to stop. And she pushed me over, and that's assault. And so she was arrested and taken away. And so that kind of really scared us because, if that's going to happen at 11 o'clock, what's going to happen at the weddings? And so So 50 police officers in the base of the church. 1,000 people came to the weddings, excited as anything. Everybody had to be searched at the door. There were protesters and signs and yelling outside. And there were 80 media outlets from around the world, some of which, for the very first time, was covering a positive event in the lives of gays and lesbians. First time ever. So when I walked into the sanctuary, as soon as I walked in, people stood and applauded and cheered. And cheered because they knew it was historic. And I reminded them that this was a worship service and that any disruption is a criminal offense and people would be prosecuted and arrested. And so we proceeded with the weddings, and at the end of the weddings, the way it works with the publication of the banns is after all this usual signing and stuff, I sign it and I issue the marriage certificate instead of the state, instead of the city hall. So I issued the marriage certificates to the lesbian couple and the gay male couple and declared them married, and the place went nuts. It was like cheering and cheering and cheering and cheering, and all the papers had the same picture the next day. Me in my robes, and a lesbian couple and a gay male couple all standing together, all was just beaming that we were so excited. And I couldn't, like I said, couldn't leave my home for 2 weeks without a bodyguard. I got a phone call at home that said, people like you need their heads cut off. And so the government of the day, the provincial government, which is responsible for registering marriages, refused to register them. So we took them to court. We took the city, the federal, and the provincial governments to court. And we asked the judge to join our case with the other couple's cases. So they became one case. And ultimately, we won the first court case. But the judge suspended her ruling for 2 years. She said it's going to take government's time to work out the finances of this and change the laws. So I rule gay marriage constitutional, and all the prohibitions against gay marriage unconstitutional, but I suspend my ruling for 2 years while they work through the issues. So the government appealed that decision to approve gay marriage and to the Ontario Court of Appeal. And that court ruled again in our favor, did not accept the government's appeal. But that court ruled immediately. They said the government doesn't need time to correct this. We make this effective immediately. And in their judgment, they said, and we order them to backdate it to include the marriages at the Metropolitan Community Church. And so that's what made our marriages the first legal marriages in the world. Canada wasn't the first country to approve it. It took a while then because the Harper government wouldn't recognize them and also decided to have a free vote in Parliament. And we won that vote, right? And then that settled the issue in Canada. So officially the Netherlands is the first country that approved it, but ours were the first marriages that were legal. That I didn't give up on God and that God didn't give up on me. You know, it would have been, and that I didn't give up on who I was myself. You know, it would have been so easy to become a Baptist minister and pretend, live a lie. It would have been so easy to have given up on Christianity, just been mad because God didn't take it away. And, you know, God could have given up on me when I said no, that I wasn't going to become a minister. But I'm really thankful, you know, that I've hung in because, you know, I'm not done yet, but I've had an amazing, amazing life, you know, and so many little notes and emails from people, you know, in the midst of the AIDS crisis, people who were dying were leaving their churches to come to our church to die. And they found a safe place for that, you know. And parents whose son was gay and had AIDS were leaving their church to come to our church because they knew they wouldn't be supported in their church. You know, young lesbian couples with kids, when their churches wouldn't baptize the kids, came to our church. You know, and so we've been a safe place for people, and I think we've you know, changed the way spirituality and religion are viewed in the gay community. We're a very integral part of the community. People call on us all the time when there's a demonstration or an issue. And I was chosen as the Grand Marshal of the Pride Parade for World Pride, a religious leader. Think of that, from a place where religion was thought of as the enemy to a religious leader being chosen by the community to be the Grand Marshal of the Parade for World Pride in Toronto. Right? So to see, that shift, there's just so many things. The support of my family down through the years. My mom and dad eventually totally accepted me, and John, my partner, and I have been together for 36 years. An amazing blessing. We have a wonderful home, 2 great dogs. I could go on and on and on with the things that I'm grateful for. And, so it's been a pretty amazing life. And I'm also grateful that at 66, I'm not ready to, put my feet up and read a book and retire, right? As tempting as that is sometimes. But I've still got work to do, I had a sabbatical a couple of years ago, and I met with the leaders of the international gay lesbian organizations. And I said to them, my impression is you're all secular, and you see religion as the enemy. Is that true? And they all said yes. And I said, so you're doing nothing to work with gay lesbian Christians or gay lesbian Jews or gay lesbian Muslims in the struggle? And they said, that's true. And I said, well, one of the reasons why we've been successful in Canada is we've been involving people of all different faiths. And our church is leading the way in that issue. And so we've undercut that God versus gays argument again and again and again and again. And I said, if I start an international organization whose sole purpose is to confront religious-based homophobia, to change hearts, not fight about laws, but to change hearts, would you work with us? And all of those organizations said, absolutely, this is the missing piece. So that's what I want to do. And I want to write. I want to write about progressive Christianity. Eventually, I want to write about my own story, but that'll take a while. There's lots for me to do. I think my most significant contribution's in front of me. And I think, there's 68 countries in the world where if I gave a speech about gay rights, everybody in the room, gay or straight, would be arrested. It's illegal in 68 countries in the world for there to be a conversation, a gathering, for gay people to join together for a gay birthday party for someone and invite all their straight friends. Everybody would be arrested. A university professor to talk about, how wrong it is that there's laws that condemn gay people. Everybody would be arrested, gay or straight. And in 10 of those countries, those of us who are gay or lesbian would be executed. So we have a lot of work to do. And yes, Canada is coming along and we're achieving great things. I'm very proud of this country. As far as I know, when I got this Order of Canada in 2007, I was the first gay activist anywhere in the world to receive their country's highest honor. That's amazing, and it's Canada, And so we have a lot of work to do, and I'm looking forward to doing some of that work. And
it's you and Ellen now.
Well, it's really funny, I did a talk for a group of grades 7 and 8 kids here in Toronto, in a middle school. And so after I did my talk about gay rights and being gay and Christian, one person stuck up their hand, one little kid, grade 7 and 8, so they're 12, 13-year-olds. And she said, why is it people don't like gay people? And I said, in Canada, the public opinion polls tell us 2 reasons. One, people who say they don't know anyone who's gay. And as that percentage of the population goes down, because people get to know people, our support goes up. And the other reason is people who are opposed for religious reasons. And that's been the main one, that's been the main opposition. So a few questions later, a little girl puts her hand up and she says, how can people say they don't know anyone who's gay? There's Will and Grace and there's Ellen, And so this is a whole new generation that's coming up. They're coming up with seeing gay people on TV, of knowing, having gay relatives, etc. And so, it's and even young gay evangelicals, right? They care about poverty, they care about the environment, they don't care about abortion, and they don't care about homosexuality. And so now, in other parts of the world, we're going backwards. And so there's work to be done, but it's, to see how awful it was in the 50s and 60s and 70s. I went on a 25-day hunger strike protesting the police. after they raided the gay baths, you know, and then fast forward a few generations, and a young guy goes to his dad and says he wants to get married, but he and his girlfriend don't know anyone to do the wedding. And the dad said, you know, Brent, go to Brent. You know, you've been to MCC with me. Ask Brent to do your wedding. That dad was Chief Bill Blair, the chief of police of Toronto at the time. You know, so being beaten up by the police and then having the chief of police recommend that I do his son's wedding. I mean, things can change, you know, and to see that change, to be a part of that change has been amazing.
What's your greatest wish?
I think I'm going to be really blunt with this. I really want to see my people. I really want to see gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people being free to be themselves, loving who they are, having faith communities that accept them, having their laws changed so they're not made criminals just because of who they love, that they can't be discriminated against at work, at place. You know, when I walk here at Church in Wellesley, I walk holding my partner's hand and I'm not afraid. You know, I have a whole community here where we feel fully accepted and loved. And I want that for everyone, you know, and I want us to get to the place where people don't have to escape their countries to find that. You know, I think it's, you know, proclaiming God's love and justice for everyone. You know, my personal mission statement is leading our people to faith and freedom here and around the world. That's my job, you know, leading people to faith and freedom here and around the world, and looking forward to the day when that's a reality. That I did my best, you know, that I did my best to answer God's call, that I did my best to work for love and justice in our world, and I'm not done yet.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.